there are two parts of the sad story. The first part is that metrics at scale will inevitably, functionally not capture anything highly variable. And the second part is because they connect people at scale, they will tend to capture the attention and be the medium of communication for decision making by people operating at distant scale. So, right, they're two non-accidental. It's no accident that metrics don't capture what's important, and it's no accident that they become dominant in scaled institutions. All of that follows.
Team, welcome to another week here at Mops and Mo's, the philosophy podcast. The
Yeah,
Mops
I think
and Mo's
so.
philosophy podcast.
We have reached a turning point.
We have. We only talk to philosophers now. You are about to go for a wild ride, and
You, the listeners.
We've already been there. We just came off this ride. I'm incredibly excited for what you guys are about to listen to. But before we get to who and what, I think it's important to maybe touch on how this ended up happening. So Michael Blevins, folks will have heard him. He was on twice. And I would say that maybe that was our first kind of dip in the waters of philosophy in some sense. Fitness for sure, but he certainly has a philosophical tilt towards his approach, which I, for one, love. Following his material, reading his stuff, this book came up, and this author, Thi Nguyen, and a lot of the concepts in this book around metrics and games and all these things was being tied into fitness.
You sent me a podcast T was on to listen to when you first bumped into him, right?
Yes, but the podcast was linked to an article that was written by a coach that works with Michael Blevins. So there you go.
Yep.
Now, longtime listeners of Mops and Mo's will know that we're big metrics guys, somewhat cynically, maybe. And we've tried to get, the tyranny of metrics. We tried to get him on. That's not his thing anymore. But when this book came out, when this name came up, we were like immediately texting, like, dude, we gotta talk to this guy.
Yep.
Lo and behold, he's very available, which was great. Except that school starts next week. So we quick turn, brought him on. Alex, who are we talking to this week?
Our guest this week, as you've alluded to, is Thi Nguyen. He goes by T. He used to be a food writer. Now he's a philosophy professor at the University of Utah. Pretty cool journey there.
Awesome character arc.
Yeah. He writes about trust, art, games, and communities. He's interested in the ways that our social structures and technologies shape how we think and what we value. If you read his stuff, there's some really cool discussion of how technology is value laden. We think of technology as like value neutral. It's just a tool. Not the case. Technologies carry values of their own. His first book is Games, Agency as Art. It was awarded the American Philosophical Association's 2021 Book Prize. It's about how games are the art form that work in the medium of agency. A game designer doesn't just create a world, they create who we are in that world. Games shape temporary agencies for artistic purposes, and games turn out to be our way of writing down and communicating modes of agency. By playing them, we can try out different forms of agency. He was named to Vox's 2024 Future Perfect 50, which is their list of thinkers, innovators, and changemakers who are working to make the world a better place. But today we're going to talk about his more recent book, which is titled The Score. And as a way to set that up, he came into this world through games. And you'll hear this on the podcast you're about to listen to. But he had this realization that like scoring systems are really fun in games and infuriating in work environments where they like remove context and mess everything up and people are trying to hack the numbers, yada, yada, yada. Topics we have certainly touched on here before. So that's what we're diving into today.
And I think in a weird and somewhat timely way, this lines up perfectly with what we've been calling our core four. And we talk about if
he branded his core four better than we branded ours.
Yeah, the Four Horsemen is kind of a sweet Four Horsemen of bureaucracy. I'll provide a shameless plug for our closer section. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but at the end of the recording, we actually come back on and kind of give our thoughts. Um, the point and kind of the why, and as far as having tea on, is that whether you consciously realize it or not, I would argue a very high percentage of the decisions that you are making as an individual, but then also you as an organization. There's a mosquito flying around. That's why I keep looking and smacking things. A very high percent of those decisions is based upon value capture, which is to say, and that's a term I'm stealing from him, but it's to say that the metrics that you are beholden to, whether that's institutional metrics or whether that's the metrics that your Whoop is giving you, those metrics are driving your decisions because you have adopted those as your values. You've decided that that's what matters. And that's kind of a scary truth. And I don't mean that in like a dystopian, like, nihilistic perspective, but just from the standpoint of like, wait a second, we say we're pursuing health, we say we're pursuing fitness, we're quantifying those things because we think that's the right thing to do. But in so doing, we have really removed ourselves from what we all know actually drives those things. And that's, I think, a problem that you and I have kind of messed around with for a while. Why T is such a fascinating guest is because he has the philosophical knowledge to put words to it. So, anyway, long ramble. That's why we have T on this week. That's why we're going to continue to try to be friends with him because we think he's awesome. And hopefully, this isn't the last time you'll hear from him. But yeah, go read the book.
I think it was during the recording of the episode you are about to listen to that I realized I had to really rethink how I evaluate my own fitness.
I think you have to rethink how you evaluate. Well, and that's okay. Sorry, we'll get to the episode here in a second. That I think is kind of the I was going to say $1,000 question. That's like the $1,000,000,000 question. Is like,
I think my own assessment of my own fitness has been value captured. I think
everyone's
I think I've been chasing arbitrary numbers that have little to do with
fitness.
what I actually want out of it.
I think there's a blog post here.
It's really I'm pretty rocked right now.
Alex's mind is blown. I had a similar epiphany not too long ago, which is again, I think the like I was saying, the $1,000,000,000 question is like, what do you do about it? And I don't know. We didn't really get into that. I don't think we didn't get into that because we ran out of time. I think we didn't get into that because there's really like there is not an easy answer.
What do I do other than chase numbers that I can then compare with other people's numbers to make me feel like I'm better?
Yeah, your Strava.
What do I
Strava's
do
a great
now?
example, right? Well, that's just it. And again, I promise we're going to shut up here in a second. To me, it comes down to fitness as goals driven versus process driven. When you can make that switch in your brain towards just doing it for the love of the game, Kobe Bryant, then you'll reach nirvana, self-actualization, also yoga. But yeah, man, guys, you're going to enjoy this one. If you don't, you're missing a screw. Yeah, have fun. Enjoy tea. This week's episode is brought to you by Teamworks. If you have performance data scattered across apps, spreadsheets, group chats, it means things get missed. Teamworks brings it all together. Training, nutrition, scheduling, communication, all in one platform built for the people responsible for readiness. Learn more today at teamworkstactical.com. So what I did want to do to kind of kick it off, and I mean, maybe this is a question, but more so to just get your thoughts on it, because as I was reading your book and listening to the conversations that you've had, I think the main issue for me, and I don't know if Alex agrees or not, but like what I wanted to kind of lay at your feet, right, is how you foster an environment that promotes effectively human health and flourishing, or wants to, but it's in an ecosystem, which is the military and more broadly the government. That's probably the most metric driven bureaucracy in the world.
Right.
Like, how do you do those two things? Easy question to start things off, right?
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't. Okay, we can just start by saying I don't know. Like, I have no idea. I think the best I can give you is an analysis of why numbers, especially but not always bad numbers, become politically dominant at scale. And I can give you an explanation of how intractable it seems to me it is. What we can do about it, I don't. I have some dumb romantic ideas, but I don't actually have actionable solutions for you. I mean, I
I
think
want your analysis.
okay. So a lot of this started for me in a weird place. So in my new book ended up taking the weird form of trying to explain to the world a puzzle that I thought was the most interesting thing in the world, and which I thought for a while no one else would ever be interested in, which is
Mm.
why are scoring systems so fun in games and so incredibly shitty in large scale institutions? Because a lot of my
Mhm.
experience is I teach philosophy and I want to teach people reflectiveness and creativity and like thoughtfulness and like intellectual and ethical virtue. And then I have to report to, in my case, the Utah State Legislature, learning outcomes that prove that I have done well, right? That I have not bullshitted, that I have. But it turns out there are no measures that are acceptable to distant
Mm.
politicians that actually track this stuff. The measures that are available, for reasons I'm going to talk about in a moment, but you can probably guess, right? And so in my world, it is student graduation rate, student graduation speed, salary at the right after graduation. And not only do those not track what I actually care about, they're often like counter. Like, so I was just
Mhm.
thinking about this. If I meet a student who's kind of miserable and I help them find out that the major they're in right now they don't like, and there's something else they would like more, and they shift over and they take an extra year, the metrics say I've failed. If I introduce a student and get them to be more ethical and worry about, and not just take the best paying job, but try to look for a good job that does good for the world, their salary goes down on average. I've failed, right?
Mm.
The metrics don't track the things I care about. And so I would spend days railing against them about how they were like draining the goodness out of my institution. And then I would go home and meet my wife after work, and then we would play a board game and subject ourselves to voluntarily what looked exactly like the thing I was railing at, right? The thing that makes games good often is these clear, comprehensible, completely transparent, completely mechanical measures. And the thing I think t- we can get a feel for it, like the thing that seems to make so much institutional life terrible is that we're directed not towards what we actually care about or the richness of some rich value, but something that happens to be clear, mechanically measurable, and extractable, right? Like board games
Mhm.
are awesome because you can be like, okay, the sheep are 2 victory points and cows are 3 victory points, go. And a lot of institutional life is terrible because you have to be guided by like by the way, every time I'm like in an airplane and I tell people what I'm working about, everyone wants to tell me about how their industry has the worst metrics and the worst KPIs.
Yep.
Like I've talked to like people who are in sales who are judged by number of calls, not call quality. My new favorite is at my university. Some of the student advisors are being measured on the effectiveness of their student advising, which is operationalized in terms of number of keystrokes into the student advising system per minute, which is just, I mean, right, obviously terrible. So let me give you a first
Interesting.
pass. There's a bunch of reasons for this. So one of these questions that you start to become obsessed with is like, why? So one thing you might think is that a lot of the metrics that are out there are just accidentally bad and we should just find better metrics, right? This is to me
Mhm.
the optimistic story. But I kind of had this sense, this instinct, having worked in the space for a long time, that the there weren't, for some things, not for everything, but for some things, there weren't going to be good metrics. And I think like we have to be careful. So there are two claims. One is that a metric fails to measure what it's trying to measure. And the
Mhm.
other is that a metric succeeds, but it's kind of slid our attention over from what we actually cared about to some other quality that happens to be easier to measure.
Yep.
I remember talking about this with my students, and my students were like, "Oh, but what happens when the metric, when what we're trying to do is already easily quantifiable? Like, I'm trying to be healthy,
Mhm.
and weight is easily quantifiable, so losing weight's objective." And I'm like, at what point did losing weight become the equivalent of being healthy?
Right.
Right? Like, so
Mhm.
does it make so like weight is something that's measurable. The question is, where did we get the equivalency of weight or sleep hours, right? Or
Mhm.
VO2 max or whatever for this other more nebulous thing we want to call health? So the first, I've got a ton of things we can talk about, but the best place to start, I think, is Theodore Porter. He's a historian that studied why quantifications are so dominant in the justification systems of bureaucracies and politics. And by the way, I just want to note all the explanations I'm giving apply equally to government organizations and corporations. I just want to be clear. I think a lot of people want to, like, there's some people who want to be like, oh, this is about how evil capitalist corporations are. And some people want to be about, this is how evil governments are. And I want to,
Yeah.
and this analysis applies to both, right? It's any kind of large organized institution. So
Sure.
what Porter says is it's not that numbers are bad. It's that they're built for a purpose, but they're not the only tool. So what he says is there are two kinds of modes of justification, justifying ourselves: qualitative and quantitative justification. Qualitative is in words, quantitative is in numbers. Qualitative justifications are rich, open-ended, dynamic, and context-sensitive, but they travel badly between contexts because they require a lot of shared background information to understand. So here, again, philosophy professor, I'm thinking like the notes I write on my students' essays, which I think are really complicated and really rich and really careful and, really information rich, but they don't travel well to other contexts. Like people in the business school or HR people somewhere else aren't going to understand our language, and they don't aggregate well, specifically because they're so open-ended, right? Your report and my report might track different qualities. They don't aggregate. So to get around this, says Porter, in institutions, we create quantifications, institutional quantifications. And what we do is we identify a context invariant kernel. We identify some bucket that everyone understands in the same way. And so everyone can collect into in the same way. And so everyone can collect into it in the same way. And then that information can travel and aggregate instantly. So again, in my space, that's grades and GPA, right? Everyone means about the same thing by A, B, C, and D. And so when we put all our multidimensional complex judgments and translate them down to that simple scale, then those can travel and aggregate. But the cost, says Porter, is to generate those, we have to have buckets that are context invariant. So another way to put it is, if the bucket you are using requires a lot of context-specific expertise to apply, then it won't be usable outside your context. So, and this is the thing that I find truly terrifying. What Porter is saying is, to create the technology of metrics, to create the technology of buckets that travel easily and are instantly understood, we have to remove nuance and domain-specific expertise, right? So my new favorite example, I'll stop rambling in 1 second, but my new favorite example, I was looking for the perfect example for such a long time. I had all these obscure examples that I loved, but took like 30 pages to explain because they're all about, the history of French cost benefit analysis in the 1870s. And then I found out, I realized the best example had been sitting in front of me the entire time, which is that I've been obsessed with my kids' screen time, right? We're all told to decrease screen time. And I was looking at my kid and I watched him click over and I was like, sometimes screen time means he's watching the dumbest possible YouTube shorts. And sometimes it means he's building new architecture in Minecraft or learning chess. Like he's literally playing chess online sometimes while watching chess videos. And other times he's playing the dumbest possible clicker. And screen time merges all that. And I think it makes clear, in order to track something more complicated, we would have to exercise our judgment about what was creative or worthwhile or very educationally powerful. But that's not something we can all count together in the same way. Screen time is something that everybody, and especially mass-produced devices, can count in the same way. And so despite the fact that it absolutely does not track what's actually important, it becomes to be the primary target precisely because it's the kind of thing that's stably countable at scale by radically different people from radically different contexts. So in a nugget, the idea from Theodore Porter that I find terrifying is the social power of numbers is directly related to their insensitivity, right? That they are comprehensible at scale by design. And the design process that makes them comprehensible at scale is the removal from the application criteria of anything with high nuance, high context, or high sensitivity that requires engagement in a specific domain. So that terrifies me. And it also, I think, starts to explain the emptiness of metrics. The explanation is the thing that makes them powerful to someone very distant to you and comprehensible is that they've been made to be comprehensible, and it's no accident that they don't track subtle, important, rich stuff. Okay, first opening rant over.
No, I love that. Is the, because this question just popped up as you were talking. Is that bucketing aspect, is that something that you feel that like humans sort of subconsciously do at scale, or is that an intentional thing?
Oh, this is the $1 million question.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, this is many of the answers I have are obscenely technical and unfinished because this is what I've been thinking about. But here's one way to put it. Okay. This is going to be too philosophy geek. Whatever. You said you're geeky.
Let's do it. Go there. Take us there. We're here for it.
All concepts are abstractions. What a concept does is it lumps stuff together, right?
We're doing epistemology here for a second. Let's go.
Yeah, no, this is epistemology. I'm an epistemologist. This is epistemology. So all concepts lump things together, right? When you have the concept of a dog, you're ignoring all the variation and you're just storing this little piece of information, right, that fits in this category, and you're removing all the other stuff. I think so. Jeffrey Barker and Susan Lee Starr have this great book about it, and one of the things they say is, especially in official classificatory categories, every classification system is a decision about what to remember and what to forget. So think about like the U.S. Census categories of race, right? That's a decision that the difference between Asian and Latino matters and is worth recording, but the difference between East Asian and South Asian does not matter and is not worth recording, right? So it merges together, say, Black Americans with people from Kenya, right? Those, the system is saying that difference doesn't matter. Okay. So, and one of the reasons for that, straightforwardly, is cognitive resource limitations. We don't have the memory to store all the detail, so we grab the thing that's important. And one way to put it is that concepts and classification systems, we have to share, but that means that we have to hold them stable. And so we have to kind of fix them until somebody, in many cases, fixes one version of it. So a lot of the idea, one of the Barker and Starr's ideas about classification systems is a lot of the time somebody fixed what we're paying attention to and what we're keeping track of, and their interests may not align with yours. They have this great example. So their book studies the ICD-10, which is the statistical manual that sets the codes for collecting mortality data, right? So, you're the kind of nerds that know about this. Okay.
We know this. Yep.
Okay. This is one of the things. People come to my class and they're like, "Oh, we're going to talk about existentialism, the meaning of life," and I'm like, "We're going to talk about classification manuals for mortality."
ICD-10.
But I think this is actually the seat of power. Okay, so here's the ICD. One of the things that they point out is if you look at the ICD-10, you look at falls coding. There are like 15 codes for urban falls. There's different codes for fall from playground equipment, fall from hospital equipment, fall from a stair, fall from an escalator, fall from a balcony, right? It goes on and on and on. There's different codes for fall from a commode and fall from, I think there's different codes for fall from a hospital bed and fall from other furniture. And then for rural falls, there is fall from a cliff and fall other. And that's it.
Yeah.
So I think it's
funny.
Right. So it's straightforward. I mean, if you look at the history of the ICD-10, it was made by doctors in New York and Paris and London. They were in urban environments, in urban hospitals, mostly looking at urban patients, right? And so they made that to suit their purposes. And I think not maliciously, it was just what they were seeing. And then when that system gets pushed out, suddenly everyone is shackled to this information infrastructure that's ignoring certain things and paying attention to other things. And institutionally, suddenly, we have so much more attention towards urban falls than, right?
Falling off a cliff.
Than rural falls. There's no code for falling off a tree versus falling down into a river, right? Those aren't separated in the information. My favorite moment in researching this, I was talking to a political scientist about this, and he was like, "Oh yeah, Hobbes wrote about this." I'm like, "What? Hobbes?" So Hobbes is a political philosopher. A lot of people know. They think that basically life is tyrannical and powerful, and morality just turns out to turn down to whoever has the most power, like the tyrant. Just morality is just what the tyrant can make us do. But it turns out that Hobbes has the wildest definition of power. He says the ultimate tyrant, the true controller of the world, is not the person with military might or strength of arms, but with a person with power over language. Because if you can define success and failure for people, you control them from the inside. And one way to put it is that classification systems and, in some sense, drawing the lines under our concepts are a way of telling people what to pay attention to, what to track, what we can communicate about. Right. You all have just pushed me into the depths of philosophy. I thought we were going to be
No,
talking
I
about
just the other day
about
was reading how
performance.
the person that owns the definitions is the person who's most powerful. Like same exact concept. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So I got to take a second. I'm very worried that we're not going to get through nearly what we want to get to in this conversation.
But that's a good thing, to be clear.
But to knock out a couple like pieces of context that I think are relevant, you talked about ICD-10, which is deeply relevant to like a lot of what we do in terms of like injury prevention or tracking of injuries or what interventions influence injuries.
Right.
And I think a couple of things are worth stating. One is that when you're on the outside looking in, the idea of like counting injuries seems really, really simple until you have to start counting injuries, and it suddenly becomes much harder. Like, is it only an injury if it prevents them from doing their job or prevents them from playing the sport they play? Because you can play injured. So is like a scrape an injury like that?
Exactly.
Like, it didn't bother anybody. But the reality is, once you get to the ICD-10 codes, which is the data that all this research is done on, I've been far enough into the machine to see that medical providers just have a few of their own preferred ICD-10 codes that tend to cluster based on the hospital they work in and who they learned from.
Right.
And so rather than like filtering through the whole list, they just go to the one from that category that they remember and use all the time. So you'll look at like two different hospitals and see clusters of different conditions, but those aren't actually clusters of different conditions. They're clusters of preferred ICD-10 codes.
Right.
We are a military fitness podcast. Like that is where we got our start. We talked about deadlifting and running and all that kind of stuff. and I keep coming back to the idea that I don't think we have a good definition of the word fitness before we can even start to quantify it, because like people think it's how many minutes to run a 2 mile, how many pounds on a deadlift, how many reps of push-ups, whatever. But fitness is specifically about context. Right. Like when he said survival of the fittest, he didn't mean the guy with the heaviest deadlift and the fastest 2 mile. He meant most suitable.
He meant highest VO2 max, obviously.
He meant most suitable to the environment. And so when you remove the context and try and generalize fitness, you lose the whole idea of suitability to a niche. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. This is so good. So let me say a bunch of things. And if I forget to talk about Elizabeth Barnes on health at the end of this,
I'm going to write it down for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Elizabeth Barnes health. Okay. Go.
Okay. So first, one way to think about it is there are two forms of incredibly subtle power. One is drawing the line exactly, right? And two is what we decide is countable. Okay, so here's what I mean. This talking about like people think counting injuries is obvious. So in a lot of these cases, people think counting whatever is obvious, and then you realize so much depends on the exact definition and what it includes and what it excludes. So one of my favorite ways to track this is to look for tiny changes in the DSM, which categorizes mental disability, mental disorder. And you'll see little, so, depression used to have an exemption if you're grieving a recent loss, and then they removed that. And suddenly depression counts move up massively, right? And so that looks like this tiny line drawing. It changes the count. It also changes who's coverable and prescribable for various meds and various other interventions, right? Based on that little tiny line. Another massively interesting line in this case, I think this is related to what you're talking about, is questions about whether people keep fighting about whether something counts as an addiction, if whether or not someone has to think it's bad for them, right? This is massively different, right?
That's part of my definition of addiction
Right.
personally, but this is like a conversation that comes up surprisingly frequently.
Right. So here's the problem. It's really hard to differentiate between an addiction and a passion, right? I need to rock climb all the time. I get depressed if I don't get rock climb. I feel terrible. Like I'm super sad, and like I dream, like it looks like an addiction. Why doesn't it seem like an addiction? People won't say, "Oh, it's because I like it." But if you add that writer, then heroin isn't an addiction if you like it, right? So anyway, so line drawing is massively important. That's one. Two, stage two is a lot of the times there's certain areas where line drawing is easier, just naturally. So I think drawing the line about what counts as an injury is pretty hard. Drawing the line around how many days of work you took off is pretty easy. That's easier to count, right? Again, drawing the line around how many students increased reflectiveness, that's really hard to count. Drawing the line around counting the quality of how many years it took for a student to graduate, that's easy. Those are lines that are pretty easy for us all to track. So one of the things that's happening, I think, interestingly, is that a lot of the things we're targeting and the things that we're valuing are quietly shifting from more important things in which the line drawing is subtler or more contested to less important things where the line drawing is either easy or has been automated already. So it's kind of been settled in the background by somebody else. Okay. Most important thing. That's just all prelude. So what you said is fitness is contestable. I think that's exactly the core idea. So Elizabeth Barnes, a philosopher who works on health and what health is and disability and what disability is, she is probably has written the best books on trying to define health and disability. She ends up thinking that health is not the kind of term that's stable enough to admit of clear metrics. Here's her argument. She says, here's a well-known quality in philosophy. Some terms are context dependent. So in a really simple way. So the term tall is context dependent. There's no objective tallness. When I ask if someone is tall, it depends on the context. Do I mean, are they tall for a person? Are they tall for a man? Are they tall for a basketball player? Are they tall for, right? Right. So ask the question, am I fit? Are you asking about the average person, the average American, the average human, the average male at age 50? If you use as your index class my fellow rock climbers, I am the least fit person in the gym. If you use as a context class fellow philosophers, I'm pretty goddamn fit. Right? Okay. So a lot depends on context class. Next slide. She thinks the term health is essentially context dependent. In particular, it's context. It depends. It is relative to what your interests are and what functionality you're trying to get. So one of her examples is my knee healthy? And what is the right intervention to make my knee healthier? She points out that health of a knee for a 20-year-old Olympian that's trying to train to get the gold medal in 4 years is very different from my notion of health with my knee. The Olympian is probably more interested in maximal performance in 4 years and will take a lot of functionality hits 50 years down the line, right? For maximum performance within 4 years at the human edge. I am interested in climbing as long as possible. Like I would prefer to climb into my 60s or 70s. So I'm not going to take massive hits to my knee for short-term performance, but I will accept a fair amount of pain to keep doing it. Somebody else, like my parent, were most interested in being able to walk gently, pain-free for as long as possible. So what about climbing? Climbing is actually probably bad if you want to walk pain-free. It's unhealthy if your health goal is to walk pain-free until your 70s. But if your health goal is to do interesting stuff like climbing for as long as, right? So what counts as healthy and what counts as a health promoting benefit is going to vary highly, both on context and interest, and in many cases, depending on your background comparison class. So the claim here is going to be that a term like health and a term like fitness is by its very nature not measurable at scale, because the thing it isn't stable between people, right? Things that we measure are stable between people, right? Things that we can count at scale. But the things we care about, our values, are not stable between people, and our contexts are not stable between people. So here's a general, I'm pretty entertained that the questions you're asking, that you're supposed to, that we're supposed to be talking about human performance, and you pushed me to talk about the most technical jank. But so the worry is that instead of our actual values and attending to things that actually work in our context, using metrics will steer us towards those qualities that are stable at scale.
Yep.
And so cut away from a lot of things that matter, because a lot of things that matter are highly variable.
Well, that's like, okay, I'm going to cook here for a second. I don't know where I'm going.
Go.
I think that is the tension that really kind of forms the foundation of why we keep getting on and recording ourselves talking into cameras,
Yeah.
right? It's because in our environment, and I don't think that this has ever been done maliciously, but in our environment, health, quote unquote, AKA readiness, quote unquote, AKA lethality, quote unquote, equals your PT test score, we call it putting somebody on profile, whether they're injured or not. And, are you seeing a provider or not? But basically the point is we've created this bucket of quantifiable objective metrics that determine whether or not the human being sitting across from you wearing camouflage is flourishing. And what's funny is, like, Alex and I were at a symposium not too long ago, and we asked the question to the audience of, like, how many soldiers do you know who have a perfect score on their PT test, but are the least resilient human beings you've ever encountered? And they've virtually all of them raised their hand. So my question, I think, to kind of narrow it down to a singular point is, like, how do you, at scale, can you account for that subjectivity, that squishiness, or is it just a lost cause? 100% of NFL teams, 100% of NHL teams, 87% of NBA teams, they all trust Teamworks. The tech platform powering elite sport is now powering military readiness. Learn more today at teamworkstactical.com. Team, this episode of Mops and Moes is brought to you by Train Heroic. Train Heroic is a reliable, well-designed platform for programming, tracking, and communicating with athletes. If you've been with us for any length of time, you will know that Train Heroic is the platform that we use to power our own training, long and strong, which you can find at our website, mopsandmoes.com. If you're looking for a solid platform to support your own coaching, whether it's your full-time role or a side hustle, Train Heroic is definitely worth checking out. You can use the link in any of our show notes, you can find it in our newsletter, or you can head to our website, mopsandmoes.com/training to get your first week for free.
Two things I want to note before we move on. One is there are two squishings together that just happened in the last thing. One of which I think you noticed, which is the squishing together of a weird score, like whatever the physical fitness testing is, with the idea of effectiveness. And then I think you squish together the idea of effectiveness and flourishing. And I think these are totally different. Right?
That's a good point. No,
right? Someone who's very effective may not be flourishing. And I mean, I think this is a general problem for humanity. Like flourishing, a lot of human flourishing might involve being kind of lazier, right? And laziness, in various kinds of laziness, it's kind of funny because I think, like, what gets counted as laziness is weird, but various kinds of things that look like laziness to the outside world because they don't mount up countable outcomes might make you really happy, might make you really creative, and might give you a really good life, but they're not going to count as being productive or efficient to some end. So I just want to separate those two and think.
100%.
But I think there's still, you're right. Like, even if we agreed on a goal, efficiency at lethality, right? And this is, you can probably guess this is not a goal I share. But even then,
totally fair.
I can I too can see the comedy of treating, I don't know what, like sit-ups or a mileage run for that.
Yep.
So I also suspect that I have a private theory. This is not something I have an argument for, that it's unsurprising that people that max out in the scores are going to be less resilient, because what makes you max out a score is ignoring the complexity and richness of the world and hyper focusing on a small, narrow thing and
There you
cutting
go.
yourself off from human value. So, but also the most depressing argument I have in my book is that insofar as our institutions reward people for hitting metrics, then the people who rise in power will be the people who burn out caring about what's actually important in favor of gaming metrics. Okay. So
You got a
I
lot of people nodding their
just
heads
to
right now.
inject, I had that conversation literally yesterday.
right.
The senior enlisted leader of an organization came in to talk about the problems with health and wellness in their command.
Right.
And they highlighted that a key part of the problem is that the commander, like the senior leader for the organization, is like really good at everything the military wants them to be good at and absolutely crushes it and has no balance in their life whatsoever.
Right.
And it's somehow worked out for this guy, but it's burning everybody else to the ground.
Right.
And so this is like a very, very much a problem in an organization where like they try to score everything, and the people who score the best
Everything has a
get
score.
the
Right.
authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was giving this same material at a talk at a ethics conference full of philosophers, and the conference happened to be near West Point, and so a couple of the West Point professors who taught ethics had showed up with a bunch of their students, and I expected them to hate this, and they were more attentive than
No.
anyone else, and they came
Yeah.
up to me and they're like, "This is our life. You've described." I mean, this is me too. There's this beautiful paper from Paul Smaldino and Richard McElrath, which basically models the same thing in like the sciences. They have a computer model that's like, what if the thing that makes your science maximally rigorous and good is not the same thing that gets you to publish a lot, right? What gets you to publish a lot is aiming for the minimal acceptable standard of rigor. And what if people get jobs from publishing a lot? Therefore, we should expect the people to get the fanciest jobs and train the most students and inculcate their values. So the people that are willing to game the system and drop the rigor of their argument as much as possible in order to
Yep.
meet the minimal acceptable standard of publishing, to publish as much as possible. By the way, incidentally, now people are gonna hate me. There's a bunch of analysis that some of these folks have done that claims that the field that this has happened to the most is sports medicine, and that sports medicine has
Yes.
like the lowest standard of rigor, statistical rigor, and that stuff gets that basically there's this. All right, God, I wish I had the reference handy that like in sports medicine, this particularly bad statistical method got accepted that wasn't accepted in other medical fields. And then people figured out if they use the statistical method, basically it was a way of hiding p hacking. If they use the statistical method, like it was 3 times easier to get a significant result. And so everyone jumped on this garbage statistical method. And the people that didn't couldn't compete in the job market. So it is a lot of this is about what's interesting between a lot of what's going on is what's the interesting thing is the gap between what's easily measurable and what's important. But insofar as large scale institutions function by tracking the things that are comprehensible at scale, then I mean, this almost starts to seem inevitable, right? Like
Yeah.
what we're talking about is not like some random. And I think you said something that's super important. This is not like people being shitty, right? This is both good communication and good science. These things work because we have things that everyone can track well, and we can accumulate these large amounts of information. And I think lots of people who are in this space are doing this precisely because they want to lean towards the things that are comprehensible to everyone and which everyone can track. There are very good motivations for doing that, right? But there's a price. I mean, the whole point is that there's a price that seems evidently obvious to most of us that cannot be communicated well in large scale systems. I mean, it's almost like I mean, hopefully it's like this is kind of a language seizure, right? Large scale information, large scale institutions become captured by a mode of communication that systematically cuts out high variation. So what Oh, before we do the what can we do question, have you two read James Scott?
James Scott.
No, but I was about to ask you if you've read 2 other authors, so I've got
Okay.
those queued up.
I have a homework assignment for you.
James Scott
Um,
pulled up A Criminal, if that's who
Now,
you're
James
okay.
Scott, Seeing Like a State is the book you want.
Seeing
So
like okay, got it.
my 2 favorite books in this space are James Scott, Seeing Like a State, and Lorraine Daston on rules, where she
I
gives you a
did see that
definition
book.
of mechanical rules. Okay, so let's start with Scott. So here's Scott's view. Scott is an anthropologist who is interested in why certain large-scale schemes to manage the world by states failed inevitably. And by states, he means any large-scale organized bureaucracy. He's really conscious about this. Once again, whatever the political background of your listeners, he likes to hop between large-scale bureaucratic communisms and large-scale capitalist corporations and find the same problem in both. So
Ooh, I
here's how
like
he
that.
puts it. He says large-scale states, again, we mean government and corporations, right? Large-scale states prefer the parts of the world that are legible to them. They can only see the parts of the world that are easily processable by the information style of bureaucracies. So they can't see parts of the world that cannot easily be counted into large scale categories. They can easily see the parts of the world that are regular. So here's this early example about how in the 17th and 18th centuries, German forestry managers tried to manage their forests for maximum yield, but they found it too complicated to keep track of. There's too much underbrush. There's too many things tangled. They couldn't count anything. So they tore out the forest and replaced it. And they reduced the biodiversity from like hundreds of types of trees to 2. They removed all the bushes and they planted all the trees in regular rows to make it easier to count.
Sounds very
Made
German.
it easier. Well, it's also everything. This made it easier to optimize plank yield because everything was highly legible to the state. And the relationship between interventions and outputs was very clear. And then after about 2 or 3 generations, the ecosystem crashed completely because all that weird, thick, complicated diversity was actually doing all this stuff they weren't tracking. And when they killed it all, the soil fell apart, the bees all died, and the forest crashed. So his general view, one of my favorite examples of his is, okay, consider an old style city like Istanbul, which is a city I love. Super windy streets, really labyrinthine. He says such a city gives a knowledge advantage to the local over a distant government, because to navigate an area, you need a lot of local knowledge. So in a labyrinthine city, police from a distant area and an army gathered from people from all around the country, they have a disadvantage. The local has the advantage, right? So, in fact, famously, during the riots in Paris, the French government tried to send in the Foreign Legion, and they couldn't. The citizens who were rebelling won because they knew the streets. The streets were really complicated. So Paris raised itself and rebuilt itself as a simple hub and spoke. Here's the claim. Simple patterns like grids and hub and spokes are much more legible to the government and to large-scale states because anyone can navigate them and doesn't require particular expertise. So does that make sense? So a grid city is much easier to rule over with an army gathered by people from everywhere because locals no longer have an advantage because you've eliminated the local variation that locals used to have an advantage over. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever been to the Pentagon?
No, I have not been to the Pentagon.
Because I have to point out that like the heart of our organization has a very straightforward room numbering system that starts with like the number of the floor, the letter of the ring you're on,
right,
and then like a 3-digit room number that follows. So like immediately, if you give somebody like 2C127, all right, I'm off. I got to go second floor, C ring. Cool. Like our organization is built on that.
This is so Scott makes this point. So he says like one of the key features, he talks about the history of the Roman army and the way that they insisted that every camp be set up exactly the same way. And the reason was because made soldiers more fungible, right? You could swap one out instantly. And this is the general theme.
Ooh, we're talking about the 4 horsemen now.
Yeah. So one of the core, and for him, again, the military is like a central example that a lot of the forces that states don't like are things that require high variation. So you have to trust local experts who know something intimately. And so he says his way of putting it is that highly variable areas like complex grids, complex ecosystems, things where you need a lot of local knowledge are illegible to the state. The state can better see the parts of the world that are neat and even, the parts that are legible to it. So if they have a reason to reshape the world to make it more legible to the state. And this means things like tearing down complicated cities and building grids, ripping out complicated ecosystems and putting in monocultural farming, right? Monocultural farming becomes a huge part of the equation. So, oh my God, I don't even know how we got here. So yeah, whatever. Okay, I give up. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Is this making these? Is this tracking?
I'm right here.
This is perfect.
It creates more
amazing
questions.
Yeah.
I got to take the chance to ask you, because you asked us if we'd read a couple authors. Now I get to ask you if you've read a couple authors. Have you read either Tyranny of Metrics by Jerry Muller or Saving Normal by Alan Francis?
I haven't read the second. I've read the first. I think that there are a lot of people who talk in this space, and I got more insight from people like Scott and Lorraine Daston because I find that they better locate the moving parts in the desire for large-scale organizations to have people that they can instantly change out and procedures that anyone can follow if they can instantly change out. I find that through line clearer from those thinkers, and I found that more central. Again, like this is the back, like what's guiding what is guiding what we care about? It is, in this case, things that meet the standard of something that anyone can track, which means it suits a large scale institution that wants to hire and fire people and replace them quickly, instead of something that wants to trust specific hard to replace experts who know a ton.
So in that case, since we've danced around it a little bit and you've essentially been talking about the third horseman for a second here, do we want to break down the four horsemen of bureaucracy? Because I found that very useful.
We've already talked a lot about these forces. I came up with this basically because I was explaining all the things I've explained to you, and my editor and agent complained that the early draft of the book was so exhausting and mind-numbing that they couldn't track everything. So they needed a mnemonic device. Yeah, well. And so the device I came up with was, we have personified various old forces into the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So let's personify the four horsemen of bureaucracy. So the four horsemen are rules, part, scale, and control. And we've already seen them, right? So rules, this is from, I guess we haven't talked about Lorraine Daston very much, but this is from Lorraine Daston's book, Rules, where she explains that a lot of old rules that we had were intended to be applied with discretion, right? They didn't tell you what. So, in creative writing, I was taught show, don't tell, which is something that great writers follow most of the time, but not all the time. They break that rule all the time. And they break it because they understand that it's just a rough guideline, right? So she says old school rules are what she calls principles, where it tells you a rough guideline, but you can't just follow it unthinkingly. New style rules, she says, are mechanical rules. They're intended to be applied unthinkingly. And she thinks the reason they exist is because they make labor cheaper for large scale organizations, because you can hire and fire people at will. So, what I think of is like, if you ask my mom how to cook something Vietnamese, she's not going to give you a recipe. She has this long, complicated, like instinctual response to ingredients where you're tasting things and changing things and adapting, because that's how real cooks cook, right? Rough principles that you have to think about and apply thoughtfully and be flexible. Mechanical rules are what McDonald's uses, right? It says do exactly this and do that. And they work as long as the inputs are completely stable, as long as the buns and the burgers and the flour do not change. If things are changing, then mechanical rules won't work very well. But what they enable you is to swap out the workers, right? So that's rules. And it goes with parts, right? What parts are interchangeable parts. They're fungibility. Do you know the term fungible? Did we explain this term before?
Yeah.
Is it
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
So fungible is that any example is equally valuable. You can just swap them out, right? Like white sugar. You can just swap it out. So parts is wait, parts is the desire to have parts that are interchangeable, and you can see how they work together, right? Parts are to make parts interchangeable. I mean, I guess a massive part of this is that to make parts interchangeable, you have to kind of rebuild the world, right? It takes a lot of work to make interchangeable parts. I can grab any cup measure and it'll work the same. And so that allows recipes to work. But that took a huge effort of standardizing measures across every factory in every part of the world, right? Similarly, here's this funky, to me, a really funky thought. Brown sugar, unrefined sugar, which is really tasty and delicious and rich and full, is very variable. You can't easily substitute one kind of brown sugar for another. Palm sugar, jaggery sugar, they all taste so different. Different batches taste different. When you make refined white sugar, you remove the variation and you've generated something that's identical. Now 1 cup of refined white sugar works the same anywhere, but that's because we've spent effort to make things that are absolutely identical. And then we make rules that work on those things. And now so the two parts interact with each other. You can have clear rules when you have parts that are interchangeable, and the parts are interchangeable, in fact, because you've had these rules. One of the reasons that McDonald's workers are interchangeable is we've made them so by having clear rules and having completely fungible ingredients. And together, those make the people fungible, right? So we make people replaceable by building the world to make them replaceable. So that's parts and rules. The next horseman of bureaucracy is scale. Why do we do this? It's because we want things that work at scale, right? Like we wouldn't in little villages where there's just a couple cooks and a couple shoemakers, you don't need standardized parts, right? When a baker can take an apprentice and teach them over time the subtle way of cooking, you don't need standard recipes. Standardization shows up when you want to have recipes that work when you have a McDonald's that wants to work across international boundaries, right? So the pressure that's giving us such clear rules and parts is scale. And why do we want this all together? The final horseman is control. And this is an image that comes from James Scott from Seeing Like a State. So he says that the central problem of the modern world is that we have an organizational style where we collect all this subtle information from this complicated world and we funnel it and compress it to a center. And the center wants to be in charge. The center wants to be in control. They want to make decisions that work everywhere. And they make decisions and then they push that out to the rest of the world. But that entire interchange destroys the complexity of complex local information, right? The point is that every different situation might have a different measure of health or education that's suited to that particular environment, but those won't compress and aggregate to your central administrator. So you have to find something that everyone counts the same way. Graduation rate. How many minutes is your mile, right? And if you get that, then all of that can go to the center, right? But there's so much information loss. And then the center can make policies that work well based on that information and they push it out, right? But that's not going to fit the local variation. That has been tailored to fit this kind of cleaned up, standardized information that went to the center. So one way to put it is that the whole story here is the massive information loss in both reception and decision making involved when you have a completely complex world and local experts in all the various parts of that world, but the decision makers are at some administrative center who need all the information funneled to them and compressed. Bureaucracy is lossy.
I liked the way you, maybe it was the way you laid it out, maybe it was the way your editors made you lay it out. I don't know, but the idea of acknowledging each of those as like demanding gods where they can offer you boons, but they will also demand sacrifices.
Yep.
Like
Mm-hmm.
they're not for no reason. They are for a reason.
Yep.
And those reasons are beneficial in large organizations, but the
Yep.
sacrifices might cost you a lot. And I think when we get into conversations about like humans, because
Right.
I need to shoehorn this in because it's like important to me to address it because it came up on somebody else's podcast a couple of days ago. So I'm subtweeting them at this point. But every time every time I listen, or every time there's like a conversation about data in the especially military human performance space, but just like health space in general, they drop this analogy of the dashboard, either a car dashboard or even worse, they'll use like a plane cockpit as an example and say that like you wouldn't drive your car if you didn't have a dashboard that told you the RPM and the miles per hour and the amount of gas. And like, so like you quantify all these things so you can like keep your car on track and make sure it's operating normally and go in the right direction, yada, 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 yada. And the argument they're setting up is that it's like stupid or negligent to navigate the world as a human without that same level of having meters that measure everything in a clear, quantified, quote unquote, objective way. And like your book wasn't targeting that analogy, but it did a really good job of like breaking down the many reasons that analogy might be set up to serve an organization rather than a human.
That is I did not know that analogy. I'm so excited because I know exactly what to say. I'm like quivering with excitement. Okay. Here are two things. The sentence, you wouldn't drive a car, assumes that the right structure is that one person controls everything. The opposite is a distributed structure where more control is pushed to the boundary. The opposite is, in the university, the question is, who's in charge of a classroom? Does the university president control how every classroom should be? Or do you let most professors decide how their classroom should be depending on their particular topic? You don't need to control things from the center. The car analogy starts by assuming that the only way to do this is for one person to make all the decisions. And Scott's entire insight is that one person cannot have exposure to all the information that's required for a large institution, and thinking so is a lie and an illusion made by oversimplification. So the next question is, what's wrong with the analogy? Okay, here's what's wrong with the analogy. Cars are simple and militaries are fucking complicated. That's, for fuck's sake. Okay, so the thing about a car is you have a dashboard. It's representing on one thing the speed of one object and the amount of gas in one tank. Those numbers are accurate because it's fucking simple. So, right. So in order to generate something that looks like the equivalent, you have to take something incredibly complicated and remove enough information that looks like it's representing something as simple as the movement of a car. And then you've created an illusion that this is Scott's point. The illusion is that you understand what's going on. And that illusion is generated by paying attention to only particular parts of the world that we can compress informationally. But yeah, like car dashboards work because there's not that much going on. And dashboards present, and I see these dashboards all the time, present in the world of an entire organization is no more complicated than the physics of a moving car, one car on a road.
So this sets up a thing. Like we're working our way towards a point that Drew will love making. But I want to take us back. Drew, was this was it the spring? How long ago were we at the H2F symposium?
Yes. I had a quarter zip on, so it must have been somewhat chilly in the morning.
Yeah, whatever it was. We went to, and we talked to human performance in the military broadly, but a lot of that is happening in the Army right now. So the Army system is called Holistic Health and Fitness. We were at their symposium, and one of the speakers got up, and like a hot topic lately is how do we track holistic health and fitness? How do we monitor it? Is it wearable devices? Is it blood draws? Is it PT test scores? Is it all the possible things that could give us constant
Health.
monitoring of data for health and fitness. And like all of that combines into this conceptual future state of having a, a H2F data management system, a holistic health and fitness data management system. And one of the speakers from the Pentagon gets up and talks about like how much progress we're making towards quantifying and measuring all these things so we can like actually get a really accurate picture of like the health and fitness of every soldier all the time. And I asked, and it was like through this little like question submission system, I put in a question, and my question was like, you've emphasized a lot how we're going to get after all these measurable things, but what about the things that are like a little bit harder to measure? Social connection, sense of purpose, sense of belonging, like the ones that are not readily quantifiable. And the answer, and this is very military, the answer was, I don't believe you that we can't quantify those things. We will find a way to
Right.
turn those into a number.
Right.
Uh,
So
and I don't have a question at the end of this. That's
Yeah.
just
Ready,
an
go.
experience I had.
no, I mean, the whole point of everything I've told you was to answer that question. So the conversation that led me down the hole of Daston and Porter and Scott and all this stuff is people that are metrics worried point to bad metrics, and other people say, no, those are just particular. We'll find a way to measure anything. And then some of us have an instinct that there are some things that are essentially unmeasurable. And all the people I've been telling you about have an account, a clear account of what that is. It's not woo, it's not mysterious. It's simply that what's hard to measure at scale is whatever depends on high local variation, expertise about high local variation, right? Anything that's highly context specific. And also one of those variations is values. Human values vary. What someone wants out of a person varies. Tasks vary in specific cases, right? So the claim is not like, ooh, the magic of the human spirit. The claim is just a claim about information compression. This is all that Scott was talking about. Scott was saying that the world is extremely complicated, and the intellectual style of large-scale bureaucracies and datafication is to only focus on those qualities that are stable enough across scale to admit of metrification and counting at scale. But that's not everything. So one thing that people often, I think Drew said something like, they're like, oh, this is subjective stuff. This isn't subjective at all, I think. It is locally expert. And I think we have somehow gotten to the idea that the only real things are the things that everyone can count together. That's not reality. That's obviousness. This is actually a tension between obviousness and subtle expertise. And people like want to use the word subjectivity and objectivity, but that's not what we're talking about. Right.
I want to ask you, because I think you'll know the answer. So we should have called them the Four Horsemen, but we call them the Core Four. We might rebrand them after talking to you, because yours sound cooler. But one of those we've just taken to call Hammond's corollary, because Hammond's my last name and I've been saying it for long enough. I don't think I made it up. And I think you might know somebody who did. And so I can stop falsely taking credit for it to our audience. But the basically what it says is what gets measured gets managed. I didn't make that part up. I know that's a thing. What needs managing isn't always measurable. And I'm getting at what Alex talked about, but specifically in the human performance space, to your point, it's this, I think the seductiveness of measurable things at the expense of, in our case, what truly drives human performance. So I submit that to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing we're talking about. There's not a great name for it.
Well, Hammond's corollary, you can use that in your next book if you'd like.
The name that most people know for something nearby is Goodhart's law, right? When something
that's another one of the core four. That's one of our core four horsemen.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think again, like the thing that's interesting is there are two parts of the sad story. The first part is that metrics at scale will inevitably functionally not capture anything highly variable. And the second part is because they connect people at scale, they will tend to capture the attention and be the medium of communication for decision making by people operating at distant scale. So right, they're two non-accidental. It's no accident that metrics don't capture what's important, and it's no accident they become dominant in scaled institutions. All of that follows. This is like, right, this is right there in Porter.
Boom.
Yeah.
So that brings me to a Porter question.
Right.
That's a little bit related to Hammond's corollary, I guess.
We're going with it.
And this is a personal theory that I'll get to in a second. I don't like your personal theory, like not necessarily tons of evidence, but I can point to examples. You cited Porter for the claim that like institutional leaders reflexively reach for statistics to justify their actions.
Right.
And in that portion of your book, it seemed implied to me that the data is also driving the decisions.
Yeah.
But I would suggest, and this is a personal theory, that there's a difference between making decisions and justifying decisions. And I think leaders actually make decisions off of extremely subjective things, largely based on personal experiences or compelling narratives or stories. And then they are on the hunt for data or statistics that help them justify that decision. It's not the reason they made the decision. Sometimes it might be, but I think more often there's a decision that's made for whatever reason, subjectivity, their personal expertise, their exposures, their history, whatever. And the justification is a little bit separate from the decision.
Right. So I think there are two separate phenomena. Both happen. The question is, which is happening and how frequent are they? So the phenomenon you're talking about, let's call it covering, right? Like you make your own decision, you think whatever you want, and then you make up things on the back end and you find some data to cover it. That's one standard story. The other story is the thing that in the book I'm calling value capture, where someone's values get seized by the metric and they actually start getting driven genuinely by the goal of going at the metric. I actually am more scared by value capture. I'm less worried by covering. If you think that a lot of really valuable expert decisions involve hard to explain features, then some people who are covering are just bullshitters. But a lot of people who are covering, and this is my experience in life, are people that have a genuinely good judgment based on refined experience, but cannot explain that in institutional terms. So they find some nearby cover. We people do this all the time. Value capture is any case where that's not what's happening, and people's justifications are directly explained by their pursuit of a metric. And I just have a lot of empirical evidence, right? Like Porter has a lot of historical evidence. Sally Engel Mary has a lot of evidence in her Seduction as a Quantification. Wendy Esplin and Michael Sauter, who studied the U.S. News and World Report law school rankings and university rankings, they just have a ton of evidence that, as a matter of fact, people's decisions, people make all kinds of decisions that would be insane because they don't do anything actually good, except that they're gaming the particular metric at hand, and they do it all the time. Like, so the presence of, the existence, I mean, there are, I'm sure you can think of some in your space. In the educational space, it's often like pushing students to get any job, even if they don't like one, so that their postgraduate metric rate goes up, right? Or like, so I think your view, which though bitter in a way, is actually more optimistic because it sounds like people actually hang on to their real values. I am more worried that, as a matter of fact, this is an empirical claim, and I think both things are happening. I know plenty of instances of both, but a lot of the behavior that I see in the world does look like it's explained simply in terms of, we're going to max our student graduation rate numbers, we're max products shipped, we're going to max out calls per, right? We're going to do a lot of interventions just to target the number, and that kind of behavior is not explained by covering. It's explained by a deeper capture.
I know like Drew's trying to bring us to a close here, but I'm going to sneak one last thing in and say, I think it's a tension around what you describe in your book as transparency.
Yeah.
And I'll just quote you. Like every time I bring an author on, I have to quote them to them. But I'll quote you and say, transparency demands that experts explain themselves to non-experts, but experts' reasons are often opaque or incomprehensible to
Right.
non-experts. The whole
Right.
reason you go to a doctor is because they understand things you don't.
Right.
And I think we're in this weird upside down scenario of we have genuinely deeply experienced experts that understand a bunch of nuance who like make a decision based on that, but then have to pretend they made it
Right.
based on a bunch of data without any nuance and without any context, because
Mm.
that's the transparent
Right.
thing to do.
So the transparency stuff came from me reading Onara O'Neill. Like, she was studying the medical context, and she was interested in those cases. And her explanation was the covering explanation. She gave me that argument originally, that experts have real reasons that are not comprehensible to people. And she thought experts use their real reasons and then covered afterwards. And
Mm.
I think at the time she was correct of the people she was studying. Specifically, doctors would make diagnoses based on intuition and synthesis that were accurate, and then cover for the insurance by looking for some reason. So documentedly, that's what a lot of docs do.
Mhm.
My friends who are docs, they tell me they do this all the time too, right? They know what's going on, and then they present a cover for the insurance paperwork.
Mhm.
Uh, I claimed in my transparency stuff that there's a different phenomenon, the capture phenomenon, and capture, if it's happening, it's worse because the experts are
Mhm.
actually being ruled by unsubtle reasons, and their actions are being guided by novice level reasons. And
Mm.
if all this empirical work I'm pointing to is true, then that's also happening a ton. And I mean, here's what I actually think is going on. Doctors who are actually facing patients are not captured. They're covering. I think the CEOs,
Mhm.
the politicians,
Yeah.
the administrative leads are captured more often. Not always, but
The higher up
more.
you go.
The higher, I mean, one explanation for it is that doctors who Anil was studying are close to the ground. They're actually looking the patient in the eye. They have patient contact. And then the people who are trying to push. So in the doctor world, I know a lot of doctors who really are attentive to illness and are really suspicious of the metrics, but they are ruled by managers who are like, no, the most important thing is to increase your patients seen per day count and our throughput rate. And they're making large scale decisions. So, I mean, I think this effect that a lot of us know is happening, but there is a sense in which a lot of and I think this is also an idea that's in the Scott, which is like, if you're distant enough and all you see is the numbers that compress away a lot of the richness, then you think that's the world because you don't have contact
Yeah.
with the actual world. And I think
Mhm.
it is really notable that doctors have a lot of patient contact, and then the people making the large scale decisions don't. I also think in my context, it's really notable that a lot of teachers have a lot of student contact, and the people making the decisions have almost no student contact, and they're looking at a dashboard.
Mhm. Don't do dashboards, basically.
Yep.
That's my ultimate fear of like the over datafication of human performance, is that it explicitly is a plan to remove on the ground context and
Yeah.
expert insight and replace it with if then statements where like enough data points tell you what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. That is exactly, I think, the vision I'm getting from Scott and Daston, that is the goal of control from the center is to make the decisions at the center and then make mechanical clear rules for everyone else to follow, and to determine policy from the center and to push it out.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
There's
I
massive information loss.
I started with a very easy question, and I want to finish with a
Okay.
very easy question,
Awesome.
and
Great.
it's a two-parter. And truthfully, we've asked this to a lot of folks, but we've never asked it to a philosopher. So I'm incredibly excited to see where you go with this.
Okay.
Something you've changed your mind on,
Mm.
and something you've doubled down on.
Okay. Awesome. What I've changed my mind on, this is okay. When I started writing this book, I had a completely different theory about what was going on.
Hmm.
I was really interested in, so Natasha Dow Schull is an anthropologist. She has really good work on the design of video game poker machines in Vegas to be addictive. And she has all this work about how they designed the apps, the video game poker, to basically hack our brains and give us specific sequences of lights and sound and reward that get us addicted to our own serotonin. And I was like, that's what's going on. Twitter, like Facebook, they're hacking our brains. They're using graphical app design to fuck with our neurochemistry. And that's what I thought was really going on. And then I started reading history, and I saw the same effect with no app. I saw the same effect from cost benefit analyses, from the US News and World Report, from completely boring, dry rankings published on crap paper. So I used to think this was a local story about addictive technology in Silicon Valley. And I now think this is a 1,000-year-long story about the rise of numbers as information compressors. That's huge
Ooh,
change.
interesting.
So what do I double down on? I think the importance of play. I think like if
I
play
love
is the
that.
thing where we are, I mean, by my current account, what play is when you're guided by your own internal sense of value and not being forced to hit some external target. I think more than ever, play is the thing that is most important, and that the world of productivity will label the least important, because by definition, it's not going to make itself productive. And actually, the thing I hate the most, I think, sorry if I'm going to piss on y'all, but a lot of
No,
people end up
please.
saying playing is important because it'll make you more productive in the end. And I'm like, fuck you. That's not what the point of life is.
I love that. What an awesome way to close. Well, sir, I know school starts soon, so thank you for hanging out with us. This has been
Thank you so much.
wild. I have way more questions, but I'm gonna let you go.
This has been amazing. This is some of the best questions I've gotten. I love it.
Yes, I'll take it. Team, welcome to the after party. I mean, where do you go? Like, where do you start?
Part of me wants to hit all the stuff that I wrote down in the notes as like topics we need to hit that we never even got to in that conversation.
Which
there's
that seems like more of an intro conversation, though. But it is
Maybe?
true. Like we had, well, I'll say this, and I'll say this in the intro. Hopefully, by the time you've gotten here, you already know this to be true. Read the book.
Yeah. Can I hit one example from the book
Please.
that like just to like give you a taste of like how much we did not get to here? He has at least a chapter, probably multiple chapters on a process by which we use what looks like mechanical objective scoring, but it's based on subjective inputs, and we essentially launder subjectivity until it seems objective because we've done enough numbers stuff to it. And he provides a number of examples, like accounting examples, whatever. But the one that stood out to me, the National Park Service does cost benefit analysis. Like, we're going to invest this much in the park. What are the benefits we get? And some of the easy to measure benefits are like increased business for all the businesses right outside the park. Like that's one of the classic benefits that National Park Service measures. But one of the harder to measure benefits is the actual experience of being in the park. But that is something they are supposed to quantify on the benefits side of the cost benefit analysis. So they did. In 1948, National Park Service set a value of visiting nature so that they could quantify it in their cost benefit analysis. 12.5 cents per visitor day.
How? What?
I did the math. If you factor in inflation, that's $1.73 today. $1.73 per visitor per day is the value of the experience.
Interesting. I
And
think
when you get to the end of that cost benefit analysis, it probably seems very objective. Like, oh, they counted up all the costs and they counted up all the benefits. But like, I don't know if I agree with the value of visiting nature number there.
Well, and I was thinking about, well, first of all, and we wrote this in the notes as we were going, we need to talk to more philosophers, clearly.
Yeah.
Second of all, what's interesting, because I think when people think about philosophy, they think of like old Greek dudes in togas talking about, ethics and whatever. But reading this book and then having the conversation with him and kind of correlating a lot of that to the world that we live in with human performance, what was interesting to me was like so many of us kind of just go through life on analog, and like all of this stuff that he talks about is happening. Like the classic, like once you see it, you can't unsee it. So all of this is happening. It's driving our decision making, which is then driving the direction that our organizations go in, which then dictates where the funding comes from and yada yada. Like this is all happening in real time. We just don't really pause and think about it. And so to read a book that literally is about pausing and thinking about it, and in this case specifically metrics, it was like, God, there's so much here, which is why, to your point, we had what 3 or 4 pages of questions we were going to get to, and the document is now 6 pages long because we were like adding and talking and like, we got to do this, we got to talk about this. Holy shit, look at that, like blah 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 blah. So I know we oftentimes fanboy over guests as soon as we finish talking to them, but like legit,
This is a
one of
special
the
one, man.
one of the coolest conversations, totally outside the field of human performance too, which I think makes it even better.
I got to do
Yeah.
one more from stuff we didn't get to.
Go ahead. There's a lot.
There's so much, but this is the last one, I swear. You can get the impression from the conversation we've had that like metrics are bad or like data is bad or it's like going to make like, whatever and the problem is actually a little different than that. And he explains it well in the book in a way. He touched on this in the conversation, but I just want to underline it, which is it's not that metrics are false. Metrics are very true about the thing they measure. The problem is that so much so that they drown out everything else. And the version that like resonates for me, like we've been having nutrition conversations at work, right? And like nutrition in like the data-driven version of it we talk about today is very macronutrient driven. How many grams of protein, how many grams of fat, how many like, and
numbers.
And those aren't false. Those are good, important numbers. But when you hyper fixate on those numbers, you can lose track of a lot of other important things that happen when you eat a meal, like social connection, the culture and the history that are part of the meal, the experience of cooking. Like there's just so many layers to food, and the experiences we have around them and the impact it has on our health. But it gets drowned out by tracking it in a very decontextualized, quantified way.
Well, it's not even nutrition. I mean, I had this on here too. It's just the gamification of fitness, and there's Whoops, there's Fitbits, there's Garmin, and I like on the one hand, you could argue that that's sort of a net positive because it gets people into fitness. But then and again, I'm pulling a lot from the book here, but like you get into this second conversation around health, fitness, wellness being process driven versus goals driven. And I think for me, reading this book and talking to T codified a lot of what you and I, and like we've gone back and forth about sort of what's the through line with all of these things. And I think really what it comes down to is how do you convince because maybe I think that's what we tell ourselves we're doing. How do we convince a bureaucratic juggernaut that what they are in fact trying to enhance or increase or improve in their population is very process oriented? One, it's very individualized, which we all know. But to your point about the food thing, like, okay, sure, call it an AFT, call it, a VO2 max, call it whatever metric you want to put on a PowerPoint. But at the end of the day, like, that doesn't matter. Like, you could nail all those things and be very unfit and be very unwell and very unhealthy.
You could very easily like drive the holistic out of health and fitness.
Exactly.
With too much focus on numbers.
And in a weird way, we didn't get to this either with him, but like, I think early days, that was what drove the genesis of this program, the recognition of that reality. You hire in all of these experts, and then the points that he uses in his book, it's like you then require that, that cohort of folks to create metrics that then makes them fungible, to use his word. And I think it's easy to say and hear all of that. And
Damn.
it's very cynical. It's very like, oh, Mops and Mose is always just talking shit about senior leaders. And it's like, I think we hit this early on with him. Like, it's okay that there's not an answer to that. Like, it is a reality and we kind of dance within that. And that's kind of why we talk into microphones. But I would put forth that there is goodness in at least just recognizing and accepting that that's true. And then figuring out from there, how do you navigate? So that was a rant, but for me, reading the book and then talking to him was like, man, there's a lot here.
Yeah, I think we are just scratching the surface on this one.
Yes. Unfortunately, he gets very busy in about a week with school. So TBD. But
See you next summer.
Yeah, see you next summer. This will be an annual thing. Us and T hanging out in the summer. Go read the book, team. He talked about a lot of other books you should probably read too. And who knows, maybe you'll see him coming to a conference near you. TBD. See you next week.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmose.com. That's mops, the letter N, mose.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmose.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.
This week's episode is brought to you by Teamworks. Training, nutrition, scheduling, and communication. One platform, every domain, every role. Teamworks unifies human performance for the service member and the command. Learn more today at teamworkstactical.com.